My narcissistic father-in-law starved me when I lived with him. My father-in-law has many narcissistic tendencies. From afar he can come off as charming and even generous. But behind closed doors he can be menacing and manipulative, and he seems to have always had it out for my husband since my mother-in-law married him when my husband was 14. My husband essentially went and lived at a boarding school to escape his stepfather who laid hands on him, didn't speak to his mother for 2 years, and was essentially on his own from his teens onward. He did go to live with them for a few years when he moved back to the UK, and my husband tells stories of being abused by his stepfather, who would rant and rave at him and demand sums of money from him. He also did a lot of things to make him as uncomfortable as possible in his house, and even admitted to doing it on a few occasions. For example, my husband worked security at nights, and his stepfather refused to move his personal computer out of my husband's bedroom and would go in there all day and type loudly so my husband could not sleep. Many years ago, after my husband and I had gotten married, we were going to be moving back to London. However, my husband was finishing his training in Oxford and would not be able to join me for a few months. My in-laws invited me to stay with them. I was initially worried given my husband's experience with his stepfather. But I had never had an issue with him, and he had actually always been nice to me and seemed excited to have me, so I didn't think much of it. But when I arrived it quickly became weird. I was barred from working on the computer in the living room while they were watching TV, but I was full-time trying to apply for jobs and find a flat, so I started sitting upstairs to work on my computer. But my father-in-law didn't like this and accused me of avoiding them, so now I was required to sit with them in the living room if they were in the living room. It was okay, because it gave me time to have nice conversations with my mother-in-law in the evenings. But my father-in-law let me know privately that he didn't appreciate this, and if I wanted to be around in the evenings to not disturb him with my conversations with my mother-in-law. So I was forced to sit there silently not working on my computer and not talking. Weirdest of all was that I initially wasn't allowed to keep my own food in the house. There are some dietary restrictions in the house, and my father-in-law was triggered by all dairy stuff. My in-laws thought I couldn't follow them. Even when I was allowed to keep my own food, I wasn't allowed to cook if they were cooking or might cook soon. My in-laws had 2 younger children, and my stepfather would make dinner for them before my mother-in-law got home, but he mostly did not invite me to eat with them. My mother-in-law would then get home a couple hours later and make a meal for herself or heat up leftovers from the meal my father-in-law cooked. My father-in-law worked a lot from home, so he was there a lot of the time. I would try to make myself dinner earlier to avoid his cooking time, but my stepfather thought that would conflict with him cooking dinner at 5 p.m. It didn't seem like there was an early or late enough time for me to make food. After he was done cooking he wouldn't clean up, and I wasn't allowed to touch the food or clean it up because my mother-in-law might want it, so I couldn't make anything for myself then. Basically, I could only make myself food when he wasn't around, or if I was cooking for all of them, which I did a few times. Evenings became fraught. I'd get really hungry, so I took to going out to grab cheap food at the local chip shop so I wouldn't be at home to interfere and awkwardly not be invited to meals. In my mother-in-law's defense, I think she thought I was being fed by my father-in-law, and had no idea all these weird restrictions on my access to food in the kitchen existed. And if my mother-in-law was home, I was typically always invited to meals. So weekends were much less of an issue than weekday evenings. Anyway, one day I was home, hard at work applying for jobs. And I could smell these wonderful food smells coming from the kitchen. My stepfather was cooking something that smelled delicious for my brother and sister-in-law who were, at this time, like 8 and 6 years old respectively. And in a strange twist of luck, my mother-in-law had managed to get off work early and showed up as a surprise to have dinner with the whole family. I'm sitting up in my room, plotting where I might go to get a cheap meal of my own as the food smells were really making my stomach growl, and I figured I wouldn't be invited. But then I heard my mother-in-law call up the stairs that dinner was ready and would I please join them. I was ecstatic. I was being invited to dinner. And I was going to get to eat whatever that great-smelling food was. I got downstairs and I was thrilled. They had made grilled veggies with potatoes and these delicious-looking sausages. My mother-in-law cheerfully asked me, "What kind of sausages would you like, the meaty sausages or the vegetarian sausages?" I looked at the vegetarian sausages and they were not appetizing looking. They were all shriveled and kinda gray looking, and the meat sausages looked so good. "I'll have a meat sausage, please." I was so excited. My mother-in-law was about to give me a sausage when my father-in-law stopped her. "And now you need to imagine him talking with your best Scouse accent. Oi, she can't have those sausages. The meat sausages are for the kids." "Mother-in-law, surely she can have at least one." "Father-in-law, I made those for the kids and she can't have one." "Me, I'll just eat one." There was a plate of at least 15 sausages and I felt like there was plenty to go around. "Father-in-law, but what if the kids want seconds?" So it was decided that I would eat the veggie sausages. But at least it was food that I didn't have to buy from the chip shop and eat on a park bench on the street, so I accepted my fate. That veggie sausage was the worst veggie sausage I have ever had. It was somehow both soggy and dry. It made this squeaking noise as I ate it, but I was hungry, so whatever. I should note that my 8 and 6-year-old brother and sister-in-law were the pickiest eaters I have ever seen. I had up until that point never seen my brother-in-law eat anything other than potatoes, bread and cheddar. My sister-in-law I think primarily subsisted on white carbs and candy. I looked over at their plates, and they had eaten the potatoes, but the sausages sat there untouched. My father-in-law noticed that the kids weren't eating their sausages and piped up. Father-in-law, kids, you better eat those sausages. Brother-in-law, I don't like them. Sister-in-law, you know we hate sausages, Papa. An argument ensued with my father-in-law yelling at my brother and sister-in-law to finish their sausages, but they refused. And I'm starting to get excited. Maybe this means I can have the sausages. But then my father-in-law stands up in a huff and shouts, "What a shame. Why does nobody want these?" He went over, grabbed their plates and tossed them and all the other leftover meat sausages in the trash. My husband visited a few weeks later and I told him about this incident. It led to a fistfight between my husband and father-in-law, actually, a fight my husband won.